The night was silent, yet broken by the distant hum of burning wreckage. The alien colony had once been alive with voices, markets, and laughter. But now it stood in ruins, smoke rising from shattered homes and ash carried by the cold wind. A lone human traveler named Daniel walked slowly through the broken streets, his boots pressing on cracked stones, his eyes sharp but filled with sorrow. He had seen many war zones before, yet something about this place felt different, heavier, as if the land itself mourned. Daniel carried only a small pack, a light rifle, and a torchlight that cut through the thick shadows. Every step he took echoed in the emptiness, making the silence even louder. He told himself he was only here to pass through, to find shelter for the night before leaving this cursed place. But fate had other plans. From the corner of his ear, he caught a faint sound. It was soft at first, almost like the wind playing tricks, but then it came again, trembling, weak, almost too fragile for this broken world. It was the cry of a child. Daniel froze in his tracks, his heart raced. His instincts warned him. Many soldiers and raiders use such tricks, recording cries to lure wanderers into ambush, yet this sound was different. It was not mechanical, not hollow. It was raw and alive, filled with fear and hunger. He turned his torchlight toward the sound, moving carefully. The cry came from deep within a collapsed building. Its walls half fallen, its roof caved in. Shadows stretched long across the ground, and for a moment, Daniel wondered if he was making a mistake. But then the cry broke again, sharper this time, and his steps moved forward without hesitation. The air smelled of burnt metal and dust as he climbed over broken beams and twisted wires. His torchlight caught movement, a small figure huddled beneath the remains of a wall. Daniel's breath caught. It was no trick, it was a child. She was alien, yes, but she was small, fragile, no older than 7 by human measure. Her skin glowed faintly under the torchlight, pale silver with faint lines of blue that shimmered like veins of crystal. Her large eyes, wet with tears, reflected the beam of light, and she shrank back in terror when she saw him. Her arms were thin, wrapped around her knees, and her clothes were nothing more than torn rags. Daniel lowered his weapon immediately. He knelt slowly, raising one empty hand to show he meant no harm. The girl whimpered, pressing herself against the cracked wall as if she could disappear into the stone. Her lips moved, broken words spilling out in her own language, words Daniel could not understand. But the meaning was clear enough. Fear, pleading, desperation. "I won't hurt you," Daniel whispered gently, though he knew she might not understand still. The tone of his voice softened the air between them. The girl blinked, her trembling slowing just a little. Daniel reached into his pack slowly and pulled out a small ration bar. He placed it on the ground between them and slid it closer. The child's wide eyes followed the movement, her small stomach growling louder than words could. At first she hesitated, her hands gripping her knees tight. But hunger was stronger than fear. Her little hand reached forward, snatching the food, retreating quickly as if expecting him to strike. When he did not move, she bit into the ration, chewing with a desperation that tore Daniel's heart. He realized she had been alone for days, maybe longer, hiding in this ruin while the world forgot her. As she ate, Daniel studied her. There was something haunting in her eyes, something too heavy for a child to carry. She glanced toward the broken horizon often, as if expecting someone or fearing someone would come. Daniel wondered about her family, about why she was left here, about who she had lost, and then deep inside, he knew the truth. No one else was coming for her. A chill ran down his spine. He knew what this meant. Taking her with him would not just be dangerous, it could mark him as a traitor in the eyes of alien patrols. Humans were not welcome here, and carrying an alien orphan could mean death for both. But leaving her, that was something he could never do. The girl finished eating and looked at him again, her eyes still wet but softer now. For the first time, she did not shrink when he shifted slightly. Instead, she whispered something faint, a word that he could not understand but carried weight. It was like a prayer. Daniel's chest tightened as he realized she might see him as her only hope. Maybe even more. The ruins groaned under the night wind. Shadows thickened around them, and the danger of staying too long pressed heavy on Daniel's shoulders. But he knew his path was already chosen. He extended his hand toward the girl, palm open, waiting for a long moment. She hesitated, trembling, her wide eyes searching his face, and then slowly her tiny hand reached out, resting in his fragile as glass. In that instant, Daniel knew his life had changed forever. The cry in the ruins was no longer just a sound. It was a call to his humanity, a call he could not ignore. and as he lifted the alien child into his arms, the ruined city seemed to whisper its own warning. This was only the beginning. The night deepened around the ruins, and Daniel carried the small alien girl carefully in his arms. Her body was light, almost too light, as if hunger had carved away her strength. Every few steps she stirred, clutching his shirt tightly, as if afraid he might vanish if she let go. Her faint glow lit against the darkness, soft blue veins flickering like tiny stars under her skin. Daniel could feel the rise and fall of her shallow breaths, and it reminded him just how fragile she was. He found an abandoned shelter at the edge of the ruins, half-broken walls still standing, roof cracked but enough to hide them from the sky. Inside, ash and dust covered the floor, yet it was better than sleeping out in the open. Daniel set her down gently, and for a moment she clung to his hand. Unwilling to let go, her eyes searched his face, filled with mistrust and yet something deeper, a flicker of hope she did not dare believe in. Daniel gave her a reassuring nod, then gathered a few scraps of wood and twisted metal, enough to build a small fire. He struck a spark and flames rose, warm light filling the cold shelter. The girl flinched at first, shrinking back, but then her wide eyes locked on the fire. She inched closer, shivering from the night chill, and stretched her tiny hands toward the warmth. Daniel pulled another ration bar from his pack, split it in half, and gave the bigger piece to her. She hesitated, her gaze flicking from the food to his face, then back again as if she still did not trust the gift. "Eat," he said softly, though he knew she might not understand his words, but she seemed to hear the tone more than the meaning. Her small hands took the ration, and she chewed slowly this time, glancing at him between bites. Daniel ate the smaller piece himself, careful not to make her feel like a burden. The fire crackled, filling the silence with its steady voice. After some time, the girl whispered something in her alien tongue, a soft string of words broken by pauses. Daniel shook his head gently. "I don't understand," he admitted. She frowned, then pointed to herself with a trembling finger. "Sierra," she said, her voice cracked, but she repeated it firmer the second time. "Sierra." Daniel nodded. "Sierra," he repeated slowly, and a faint smile tugged at the child's lips. Then she pointed at him, waiting, her glowing eyes unblinking. "Daniel," he replied, tapping his chest. "Daniel." She tried to copy the sound, stumbling over the foreign word. Dan-el. It was imperfect, but it made him chuckle. And for the first time since finding her, the tension eased between them. Names had power, and in that moment, they were no longer strangers. The night dragged on, and Sierra curled close to the fire, her small frame still shaking from cold and exhaustion. Daniel pulled off his coat and draped it over her, watching her slowly relax under its weight. She blinked sleepily, her gaze fixed on him, as if afraid he might disappear if she closed her eyes. But finally her breathing slowed and she drifted into a restless sleep. Daniel sat awake, staring at the fire, listening to the distant echoes of patrol ships sweeping the skies. He knew he had made a dangerous choice. Keeping the child meant drawing attention, meant risking his own life in a world that would not forgive him for helping her. But leaving her behind was no longer an option. He remembered the way her hand had reached for his in the ruins, the way she whispered his name now. That bond was stronger than fear, and Daniel was not the kind of man to run from it. The fire burned low and Daniel added more scraps to keep it alive. Sierra stirred in her sleep, mumbling softly in her own language. Her small hands clutched at the coat as if holding onto a shield. Daniel leaned against the cracked wall, his eyes heavy but his mind restless. Every sound outside, every distant thump of metal, every screech of broken machinery kept him on edge. He thought of the war that had left this colony in ruins. He thought of the cruelty of soldiers, of how easily children like Sierra were forgotten, and he thought of how fragile peace was. Yet as he looked at the sleeping child wrapped in his coat, he felt something he had not felt in years, a reason to fight for something beyond survival. Hours passed, and the firelight danced across the cracked walls. At one point, Sierra woke, frightened by a noise in the distance. She sat up quickly, her eyes wide, but Daniel's calm voice and steady hand soothed her. He gave her a piece of dried fruit from his pack and she clutched it tightly, nibbling slowly as her trembling eased. It was a small thing, but every act of kindness was a brick laid in the fragile bridge between them. By the time dawn's pale light crept over the ruins, the bond had already begun to form. Sierra no longer looked at him as a stranger. She stayed close, her small fingers brushing against his arm whenever she feared he might move too far. Daniel realized she had decided something in her heart. He was her protector now. The fire crackled one last time before dying into smoke, and Daniel stood ready to face whatever came next. Sierra rose too, clutching his hand, her glowing eyes fixed on him with trust far greater than words could explain. In the ashes of war and the ruins of despair, something new had been born, a fragile bond of bread and fire, a bond that neither hunger nor fear could break. And Daniel knew, as he looked down at the small alien girl who had claimed his heart, that this was only the beginning of their dangerous journey together. The first light of morning slipped through the cracks in the ruined walls. Daniel woke with his back stiff and his rifle still within reach. Beside him, the little alien girl, Sierra, stirred slowly. Blinking against the pale glow of dawn, her small body shivered even under the coat, and Daniel gently pulled it tighter around her shoulders. She looked up at him, her large glowing eyes filled with both exhaustion and trust. They shared a small meal from his dwindling pack. Daniel handed her dried fruit and half a ration bar, keeping the smaller portion for himself. Sierra ate quietly, her eyes flicking up at him between bites, as if making sure he was still there. When her hunger softened, she began to murmur. Soft words in her strange tongue Daniel could not understand, but the way she held her hand to her chest and pointed beyond the broken horizon told him it was important. He leaned closer, listening carefully, trying to catch patterns in her speech. She repeated a word several times, her voice trembling. Ma, albeit sounded broken. But the tone was clear. It was not just any word, it was a name, a plea. Sierra's little hands clutched his sleeve as she whispered it again and again, her voice cracking. Daniel felt the weight of it press deep into his chest. Her mother. The child was not only hungry and afraid, she was searching for her mother. Daniel sat back, his jaw tightening. The ruins around them stretched far, and beyond them, he knew there were camps, checkpoints, and slave pens run by mercenaries and patrols. If Sierra's mother had survived the chaos, she might be trapped in one of those places. Suffering in chains, Sierra tugged on his sleeve again, pointing at the horizon with desperate insistence. Her eyes filled with tears, and her trembling voice carried that single word, mother. Daniel wanted to tell her it was impossible, that the risk was too high, that she should forget. But when he looked into her eyes, wide and glowing with a fragile spark of hope, he knew he could not crush it. He had already saved her once, yet now he faced a heavier choice. He sighed and crouched before her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. I don't know if she's out there, he whispered softly, though he knew she could not understand, but if she is, I'll find her. Sierra tilted her head, not catching the words but sensing the promise in his voice. She gave a small nod, her thin fingers tightening around his hand. They left the shelter as the sun climbed higher. The ruins were quieter in daylight, yet danger still lurked in every corner. Daniel moved carefully, keeping Sierra close, his eyes sharp for movement. Every distant echo made him grip his rifle tighter. The colony was not empty. Raiders and patrols often scoured it for survivors or slaves to sell. As they walked, Daniel noticed how Sierra glanced often at signs on the walls. Symbols in her own language. She would pause, press her hand against them and whisper softly. Though he could not understand the words, he knew they were prayers. Or maybe fragments of memories she clung to. Each one made Daniel's resolve heavier. He was no longer just protecting her. He was carrying her hope, and hope was heavier than any weapon. They reached the edge of the ruins by midday. From a ridge, Daniel could see the distant stretch of smoke, towers of metal and moving patrols. It was not a city, not anymore. It was a camp. Sprawling with guards and fences, his chest tightened. Because he knew what such camps were for. He had seen them before on other worlds, slaves, prisoners, and those too weak to fight back. Sierra followed his gaze, and her breath hitched sharply. She pointed, her hand trembling, and spoke her broken word again, louder this time. Ma. Tears streaked her silver cheeks as she clutched at his arm. Begging with her eyes, Daniel's heart clenched. He could not be certain her mother was there, but Sierra believed it, and that was enough. Night would be the only chance to get closer for now. Daniel led Sierra back into the cover of broken hills. They found a hollow beneath jagged stones. Hidden from the open plain, Daniel started a small fire, using smoke stones to keep it nearly invisible. Sierra sat close, her face pale with exhaustion, but her eyes never leaving the distant camp. As the fire cracked softly, Daniel studied her. She had lost so much, yet her hope burned stronger than her fear, and in that hope, Daniel saw something dangerous, something that could cost them both their lives, but he also saw something human, something he could never abandon. He knew what he had to do, even if it meant walking into the jaws of death. He cleaned his rifle, checked the rounds, and laid out a knife within easy reach. Sierra watched, her glowing eyes wide, understanding more than words could tell. When he finished, she crawled closer. Resting her small hand against his, her lips moved, whispering the same word again, "Mother." Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes hard with resolve. The fire burned low, shadows wrapping around them. Sierra curled against his side, falling into restless sleep. Clutching his coat tightly, Daniel stayed awake. Staring at the distant lights of the camp, his mind churned with strategies, risks, and the countless ways this could end. But deep inside, one thought rang clear. He would not let the child face this alone. The ruins had whispered their warning. The fire had built their bond. Now the night carried the promise of a dangerous path. And with Sierra's fragile hope resting against him, Daniel knew there was no turning back. The search for the lost mother had begun, and it would change all of them forever. The night stretched long and heavy. Cloaking the land in silence, Daniel crouched on a rocky ridge, his eyes fixed on the camp below. Rows of fences gleamed faintly under floodlights, guards patrolled with rifles, and watchtowers scanned the dark with sharp beams. It was a prison camp, a place where the broken and helpless were trapped. And somewhere inside, perhaps, was Sierra's mother. Sierra sat beside him, wrapped in his coat, her glowing eyes never leaving the camp. Her small fingers gripped the edge of his sleeve as if afraid he might vanish. She whispered the same word over and over, her trembling voice carrying through the night. "Mother." Daniel's jaw tightened. He had no plan to storm the camp. No allies, no backup, only his wits, his rifle, and his will. He studied the guards, their movements, the rhythm of the searchlights. Patience was his weapon now. He waited, counting the steps, mapping the shadows, memorizing blind spots. The camp was alive with misery. He could hear faint cries, coughs and chains rattling in the still air. Each sound gnawed at him, making his choice heavier. Hours passed, and finally darkness shifted as the patrol thinned. Daniel touched Sierra's shoulder, pressing a finger to his lips. She nodded, though fear glistened in her eyes. He left her hidden in the rocks, safe as she could be, and whispered her name softly, promising to return. Then he moved, a shadow slipping down into the night. The air grew colder as he approached the fences. The metallic scent of blood and rust clung to the ground. Daniel cut through a weak section of wire with his knife. Crawling under with care on the other side, shadows swallowed him. He stayed low, every muscle tense, every breath measured. The camp stank of despair. Rows of cages and makeshift barracks filled the center. Daniel moved from shadow to shadow, listening to the guards talk in rough voices. They spoke of prisoners as if they were cargo, numbers to be traded and sold. His stomach turned, but he forced himself to keep moving. A faint cry caught his ear. Softer than the others, Daniel froze. Turning toward the sound, through a gap in the barracks wall, he saw a row of chained figures, thin bodies slumped in the dirt, wrists and ankles bound, their eyes hollow from hunger and pain. And among them, his breath caught, a woman with silver skin like Sierra's, her glow faint but unmistakable. She was weak, her head bowed, her body trembling, but even in her broken state, her features carried the same delicate lines as the child's. It was her, Sierra's mother. Daniel's chest tightened as he pressed against the wall. Watching, she lifted her head slightly, whispering in a cracked voice, the same words Sierra had spoken again and again. "Mother," but softer, a prayer in the dark. For a moment, Daniel felt the world slow. The girl had been right, her mother lived, though barely. The sight filled him with both relief and rage. He clenched his fists, knowing he could not walk away now. The promise he made was no longer just for Sierra. It was for this broken woman, too. He waited until the guards moved away, then slipped closer. His knife cut quietly through the first lock, the metal groaning in protest. The woman's eyes lifted weakly, glowing faintly as they met his. She flinched, thinking he was another tormentor, but then froze when she saw his human face. Her lips moved, whispering words he could not understand. Yet her eyes widened with something between fear and fragile hope. Daniel pressed a finger to his lips, signaling silence. She nodded faintly. Her trembling slowing, he worked quickly, breaking the chain on her wrists, then her ankles. She sagged forward, too weak to stand, and Daniel caught her. Lifting her gently, Her body was feather-light, like Sierra's but colder, drained of life. Carrying her was harder than carrying the child. Every step made the risk greater, the danger sharper. But Daniel's resolve burned brighter than fear. He moved through the shadows, silent as breath, yet fate is cruel and luck is thin. A guard turned the corner sooner than expected. His eyes widened, his hand reaching for the alarm. Daniel reacted before thought, his knife flashing in the dark. The man fell silently, but the weight of the act pressed heavy on Daniel's chest. He had crossed a line he could not return from. He hurried, carrying the woman across the broken ground. Every second felt like a storm waiting to break. He reached the fence, the gap he had made still open. Sliding under with care, he pulled her through. The camp still slept. Unaware, for now back at the ridge, Sierra's glowing eyes widened as she saw him return. When she saw the woman in his arms, her voice broke in a cry so raw it pierced the night. "Ma, she screamed, rushing forward, tears streaming. The woman stirred weakly, her eyes opening at the sound. And for the first time in years, hope flickered in both their gazes. Daniel laid her gently on the ground, watching as mother and daughter clung to each other. Their voices tangled in broken sobs. Words he could not understand but did not need to. It was enough to see their embrace, to feel the weight of what he had done. The chains were broken, but the danger was not gone. For the camp would soon notice their loss, and the night was far from over. The night air was sharp with cold as Daniel guided Sierra and her mother away from the camp. The woman was weak, her steps faltering with every pace, and Daniel had to carry her more than she could walk. Sierra stayed close to his side, her small hand clutching his arm, her eyes glowing with hope that burned brighter than the stars. Behind them, the camp still slept in ignorance. But Daniel knew the silence would not last. Soon the guards would notice the missing prisoner, and the hunt would begin. They stopped at a ruined hollow sheltered by broken stone. Daniel set the woman down gently, giving her a ration bar and water from his flask. She ate slowly, her trembling hand spilling some drops. But Sierra caught them, holding the flask for her. The mother's lips moved in whispers, words that Daniel could not understand. But her eyes never left his, wide with something beyond gratitude. When she finished eating, she pushed herself weakly to her knees. Her body trembled. Yet she pressed her hands to the ground. Bowing low before Daniel, Sierra mirrored her without hesitation. Her tiny forehead touching the dirt, Daniel froze, shocked by the sudden act. "Stop," he whispered, reaching forward, lifting her gently. But she resisted, whispering louder now, her voice cracked, words falling like prayers into the night. Though Daniel did not know the language, the meaning pressed against his heart. She was worshiping him. To her, he was not just a man who had broken her chains. He was something greater, a savior pulled from the dark. Daniel shook his head, his voice firm but soft. "I am not what you think," he pointed to himself, tapping his chest. "Human." Then he pointed to them both. "Alive. Free." But the mother only bowed again, her weak hands clutching the edge of his sleeve. Tears rolled down her silver cheeks. Glowing faintly in the firelight, Sierra crawled closer, her little hands wrapping around Daniel's arm. She whispered his name. "Dan. L." Her broken voice trembling. Then she pressed her forehead to his shoulder, a gesture so pure it silenced him. Daniel's throat tightened. How could he explain to them that he was no god, no savior, just a man who could not walk away from suffering? The fire they had built crackled, sending sparks into the night. Ash drifted on the cold wind, curling around them like a shroud, and in that broken place, Daniel felt the weight of their belief settle on his shoulders. It was heavier than chains, heavier than fear. Yet he could not push it away. The mother, too weak to stand, lifted her hand slowly and pressed it to his chest. Her eyes glowed faintly as she whispered again, this time a single word he recognized from Sierra. "Ma." Her voice broke with it. Yet her gaze shone with devotion. She was not just thanking him. She was declaring something deeper. She saw him as divine. Daniel looked away, staring into the fire. He did not want worship. He wanted survival. But in their culture, perhaps acts of compassion were rare. Rare enough to be mistaken for miracles. He clenched his fists, torn between rejecting the weight and bearing it. In the end, he said nothing, letting silence speak. Sierra curled into her mother's arms, yet her eyes still sought Daniel. She smiled faintly through her tears, a fragile expression that cut deeper than words. Her mother stroked her hair with weak hands. Yet every glance she gave Daniel was filled with reverence. It made him uneasy but also resolved if they saw him as more than human. Then he would at least live up to the hope they placed in him. As the night dragged on, Daniel kept watch. The camp behind them was no longer silent. Faint shouts echoed in the distance, and lights flared brighter. They would find the broken chains, the dead guard, and they would hunt. Daniel gripped his rifle tighter. His eyes scanning the shadows, he could not rest. Not while danger pressed so close. The woman stirred, murmuring softly in her language. Daniel crouched near, trying to understand. She pointed weakly to the stars, then to him. Her words falling like a chant, Sira repeated them, her small voice echoing the same rhythm. It was worship, yes, but also a vow. Daniel shook his head again, whispering, "No God." But Sira only smiled, her eyes glowing with childlike certainty. To her, labels did not matter. He had saved her, and that was enough. Her mother bowed once more before sleep took her. Daniel sighed, the weight of it heavy. Yet he did not push her hand away. The fire dimmed. Leaving only embers glowing in the ash, Daniel sat in the silence. Watching the mother and child sleep, they dreamed in safety. But his eyes remained on the horizon. He knew the hunt was coming, knew they could not stay. And he knew something else. The bond between them had grown beyond protection. It was worship born of desperation, but it was also trust. Trust so strong it could break chains, move hearts, and change fates. Daniel had not asked for it, but now it was his. As the first light of dawn touched the ruined land, he swore silently to carry it no matter the cost. The morning came with a sharp wind that carried the echo of alarms from the camp. Daniel knew they had only hours, maybe less. Before the search parties spread across the ruins, Sira's mother was weak, barely able to stand without help. Yet her glowing eyes held a quiet strength that refused to fade. Sira clung to Daniel's hand. Her small frame pressed close as if afraid the world would steal him away. The fire had died, leaving only gray ash. And the time to move had come. Daniel lifted the woman once more. Carrying her weight with steady arms, they moved quickly through the broken hills, keeping low whenever the sky lit with the glow of patrol ships. Each time the shadows shifted, Daniel's hand tightened on his rifle. His breath sharp and focused. He was no soldier bound by orders now. He was something else, a protector carrying the last pieces of a shattered family. By midday, they reached the edge of the old transport yard. Rusting ships lay half buried in dust, their broken wings jutting out like the bones of dead giants. Most were useless, stripped clean by scavengers. But Daniel's eyes scanned for something, anything that might still fly. Sira's soft voice broke the silence, pointing toward a smaller vessel tucked beneath collapsed metal beams. Its frame was scarred but whole, its engine port still intact. Daniel set the mother down gently and crawled into the wreck. The controls were cracked, wires exposed, but the power core hummed faintly when he pressed the ignition. A flicker of light passed over the console. Weak but alive, relief washed through him. It was not much, but it was enough. He returned to Sira and her mother, his voice calm. "We have a chance." They could not understand the words, but they felt the tone. Sira's eyes widened with hope. Her mother's lips whispered something like a prayer. Daniel lifted them both into the ship, his hand steady despite the storm building inside him. He strapped Sira into the co-pilot's chair and secured her mother in the back. The engines roared weakly at first, sputtering like a dying heartbeat. Daniel struck the console again, muttering under his breath, and the ship finally shuddered awake. The floor trembled, dust raining from the ceiling. Lights blazed across the yard as patrols rushed toward the noise. There was no more time for caution. Daniel gripped the controls, his knuckles white. The ship's thrusters screamed, lifting them off the ground with a violent shake. Sira gasped, clutching the seat, her eyes wide with both fear and wonder. Her mother whispered faintly, her glowing hands gripping the harness straps, and Daniel forced the ship skyward, tearing through the broken yard as alarms blared below. The patrol ship spotted them instantly. Beams of light cut through the sky. Sirens shrieked and engines roared in pursuit. Daniel swerved hard, the ship groaning under the strain. Shots of plasma fire streaked past. Exploding against the rocks, Sira cried out, but Daniel's steady hand never faltered. He darted through canyons of broken stone, using the ruins for cover. Each turn was a razor's edge, each dive a gamble. But Daniel's mind was sharp, his instincts honed by years of survival. He flew not for himself, but for the two souls behind him, and that gave him strength no training could match. One patrol ship closed in fast, its guns blazing. Daniel slammed the throttle forward, pulling the ship into a steep climb. The enemy followed, but the old transport still had fire left. At the peak of the climb, Daniel cut power for a breath. Letting the ship fall suddenly, the patrol shot past, and Daniel reignited the engines, slipping behind it. He fired a single desperate blast from the old cannons. The shot struck true, the patrol ship spinning out, flames trailing as it crashed into the ruins below. Sierra gasped in awe, clapping her hands without fear, her eyes shining with wonder. Daniel gave a faint smile, though sweat poured down his brow. One enemy down, but many more to go. The sky opened before them, stars piercing the black horizon. Daniel punched the coordinates for deep space. The engine screamed one last time before the jump drive engaged. The ship lurched forward, stars stretching into streaks of light. And then silence, the silence of space. Endless and free, Sierra stared out the window, her face glowing with amazement. Her small hands pressed against the glass as she whispered broken words of joy. Her mother, weak but alive, reached forward, touching Daniel's shoulder with trembling fingers, her eyes filled with tears, her lips whispering that same prayer-like word again and again. To them, he was more than a rescuer. He was the one who had carried them across the stars. Daniel leaned back in the chair, his chest heaving, for the first time in days. He allowed himself a breath of relief. The danger was not gone. They had no home, no destination, only the cold void ahead. But they had escaped the chains, and for now that was enough. He glanced at Sierra, her eyes alight with wonder, her smile fragile but real in that moment. Daniel realized something deeper. He had not just carried them to freedom, he had become their anchor, their protector, their family. The flight across stars was not only an escape from the camp, it was the beginning of something larger. And though he did not ask for it, he would bear it. The stars stretched endlessly before them, a map of hope written across the dark. Daniel tightened his grip on the controls. His heart steady behind him, the mother whispered softly. Sierra's head rested against the glass, and peace settled for a breath. For now they were safe together, and Daniel knew he would fight the whole galaxy if he had to keep it that way. The stars stretched endlessly, a sea of silver dust scattered across the dark. Daniel sat at the controls of the old transport ship, its engines humming softly as it drifted through quiet space. For the first time in days, there was no sound of alarms, no gunfire chasing them, no voices shouting orders from the shadows, only silence, broken by the steady breathing of the two souls he had carried out of hell. Sierra slept near the window, her forehead resting against the glass, her little hand still clutching his coat. Her mother lay strapped safely in the back, her body weak but healing slowly, though her strength had not returned. Her glowing eyes stayed fixed on Daniel whenever she woke. Sometimes she whispered prayers, her voice trembling, her hands folded tightly. To her, he was still more than human. To her, he was the savior who had crossed fire and chains to bring them back together. Daniel felt the weight of those eyes. Heavier than any weapon, he had never wanted worship, never wanted to be seen as something more than flesh and blood. Yet every act of kindness he gave them only deepened the devotion in their hearts. He told himself he was only a man, but perhaps to them, humanity itself was something divine, something rare in a galaxy scarred by cruelty. The ship's systems flickered. Warning of low fuel, Daniel studied the console, then scanned nearby space for settlements. A small outpost appeared on the radar. Hidden in a quiet belt of rocks, it was not much, but it was a chance. With careful hands, he guided the ship toward it. As the vessel descended, the outpost came into view. It was a patchwork of domes and landing pads, built by traders who lived on the edge of law. Not safe, not clean, but better than the cold void. Daniel landed the ship with a heavy thud. Dust rising around them, Sierra stirred, blinking awake, her eyes wide as she saw the small lights of life flickering outside. When they stepped out, the air was thin but breathable. Merchants and workers moved cautiously, eyeing the strangers. Some muttered at the sight of Daniel carrying the silver-skinned woman. Others looked away, unwilling to get involved. The galaxy had seen too much suffering to care for every orphan and widow. Yet Daniel walked with steady steps, Sierra holding his hand, her mother leaning against his shoulder. He found an innkeeper willing to give them a small room for a few credits. Inside, warmth spread through the chamber, and for the first time, Sierra's mother sat without chains biting her wrists. her glowing eyes filled with tears, her hands trembling as she touched her daughter's hair. The reunion was not silent this time. It was filled with whispers, sobs, and the fragile laughter of hope. Daniel watched quietly, leaning against the wall. He felt like an intruder in a sacred moment. Yet when Sierra's mother turned toward him, her gaze still carried that same reverence. She slid from the bed, bowing low. Whispering his name like a prayer, Sierra followed, pressing her tiny hands together, her eyes shining with devotion. Daniel stepped forward, shaking his head firmly. "I am no god," he said softly, his voice steady. He pointed to himself. "Human." Then he pointed to them both. "Alive." But they only lowered their heads further, whispering words he could not understand. Frustration burned in his chest. Yet it melted as he saw Sierra's smile. To her, worship was not about gods or power. It was about trust, about love, about believing in someone when all else was lost. Daniel knelt slowly, placing his hands gently on their shoulders. "You don't need to worship me," he whispered. "Just live, just be free." The mother looked up, her glowing eyes wet, her voice cracked. But the words she spoke were clear even across language. "You gave us life." Daniel froze, the simple truth cutting through his protest. Perhaps to her, kindness itself was the divine she saw in him. Days passed in the outpost and strength slowly returned to the mother. Sierra laughed more, her fear fading into curiosity. Daniel taught her small human words, and she repeated them with joy. At night they shared simple meals, their voices filling the once silent room. For the first time the ruins of their past felt distant. One evening, as the stars shone above the dome, Sierra's mother approached Daniel. Her steps were still weak, but her eyes glowed steady. She bowed once more, but this time her words were different. "No worship," she said slowly in broken human speech. Her hand pressed to her heart. "Family." Daniel's chest tightened, his throat heavy with unspoken words. Sierra climbed into his lap, her laughter ringing like bells. Her mother sat beside them, her smile fragile yet real in that moment. Daniel understood. He had not gained followers. He had gained a family. The galaxy outside was still dangerous, still cruel, but inside that small room, hope had been reborn, not through worship, but through love, trust, and the simple act of choosing kindness. Daniel leaned back, his arms around the child, his eyes on the stars beyond the dome, and he swore silently to protect them, not as a savior, not as a god, but as a man. The ruins had given them despair. The chains had broken them. The flight had nearly destroyed them. But beyond worship, they had found something greater. A new home not built of walls and stone, but of hearts bound together. And as the stars stretched endlessly above, Daniel knew one truth. Humanity's greatest strength was not power, but the courage to care.